Okay, hi everybody. I just want to just mention one little thing. I've been asked about whether I plan to do nach inside or outside. I think it's obvious I'm doing it outside. I'm willing to consider inside, but I just want to tell people, I think I've told you before, that if you go to the website Kol Halashon, I actually have video shiurim on every perek of nach, from Yoshua to Divrei Hayamim, pasuk by pasuk by pasuk. So if you want an inside shiur given by me, you can actually get it. It's there already. So as a result, I don't see a great tayeles in my repeating what it took me 2.5 years to do. So essentially, this is more like a shtickle Ian shiur augmenting the Bekiah shiur. So again, if you want to get a pasuk by pasuk by pasuk reading of every single thing, you can get it. It's Kol Halashon, KOLHALASHON. But nevertheless, I'm willing to consider even inside for this, but I'm just saying that it may not be the best tayeles of our time. Okay. Anyway, we were looking at the unusual halachos of Yeriho, and Yeriho was the only city in which the warriors, the army, was not allowed to get any benefit from the shalal of Yeriho. Most of it had to be totally destroyed, and things like the metal, the gold and the silver, the copper and the jewels, that was to be given to the Mishkan, to glorify the Mishkan, or what later would be the Beis HaMikdash. And the emes is there are two precedents. In other words, there are two different halachic categories that kind of explain what went on with Yeriho. One is the category I mentioned yesterday of Ir HaNidachas. So Ir HaNidachas, remember, is the city in which most of the inhabitants have worshipped idolatry, the city that is pushed away from Hashem. So the Torah says all of the inhabitants who worship the Avodah Zarah are killed with the sword. The righteous people do get to escape. The righteous people do not get killed. But all of the property, all of the shalal, has to be burnt, has to be destroyed, and even that of the righteous people. So as the Gemara explains it, tzaddikim leave the city naked. There is a machlokas, do they wear the actual clothes on their back? But all of their property is simply destroyed. So one way of looking at the Yeriho story is it's like an Ir HaNidachas. Obviously, most of the inhabitants, all of the inhabitants, probably, except for Rahab and her family, were worshipping Avodah Zarah. So this may be a din of Ir HaNidachas. The problem where the analogy breaks down, however, is that obviously the halachas of Ir HaNidachas were not totally followed, because number one, why would that only be Yeriho? Every city in Canaan was in Ir HaNidachas under that definition, and yet we find that all the other cities, even though the people were killed, they were allowed to keep the shalal, right? That's one problem. And another problem is, with Ir HaNidachas, except if there's a mezuzah or something, everything is burnt. Now here, even though most of the stuff was burnt, but the gold and the silver was given to the Beis HaMikdash, or to the Mishkan. That is not true by Ir HaNidachas. By Ir HaNidachas, we don't take anything at all. So there are two aspects in which Yeriho does not totally fit the paradigm of Ir HaNidachas. One is why Yeriho and not other cities, and two is the donation to the Mikdash. So the other analogy that comes to the fore, but these are just analogies, these are not complete comparisons, is the mitzvah of Bikurim, a totally different area. Right? The mitzvah of Bikurim says a person is a farmer in Eretz Yisrael, and a person has a crop of the 7 species, right? Wheat and barley, fig, pomegranate, right? It's not only fruit, it includes wheat and barley. So what does the Torah say? The very first of your fruits you don't keep, you don't eat, you don't enjoy yourself, but you bring to the Beis HaMikdash, and you declare your gratitude to Hashem, and you then give it to Kohanim. Right? The Torah says the very first that you love the most, you're most attached to, you have to give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one could look at Yeriho as the Bikurim of Eretz Yisrael. It was the very first city that we conquered, and therefore instead of greedily grabbing the shalal, we give some of it to Hashem. But again, it's not a complete analogy, because most of it you're destroying. I mean, you're not giving it all to Hashem. I mean, you're giving some to Hashem, and others you're just destroying. But nevertheless, it seems that Yeriho is a combination of Bikurim and Ir Hanidachas. You're bringing both of them together. Now, in terms of the people, everybody in Yeriho was killed. This means man, woman, children, except for Rahab. We'll get to in a moment. Now, let me just remind you, we talked about this a long time ago, but let me just remind you about this issue, because obviously at a time when we're waging war against Hamas and people who believe in genocide and practice genocide, and we talk about how evil they are, how bad they are. So sometimes the questions that come up is, hey, don't we do the same thing? Don't we also believe in genocide, wiping out cities, wiping out the Canaanites? How do we understand it? Well, once again, we don't necessarily have a perfect answer to the question that we can understand. The Torah of Hashem is sometimes above our seichel. But I just want to remind you of a very, very important machlokes, Rashi and the Rambam. The Torah does say, when we enter Eretz Canaan, and we encounter the 7 Canaanite nations, the Chiti, the Amori, the 7 Canaanite nations. So the Torah says, Lo sechaye kol neshama. This is in the Torah. Do not allow a single soul to live. You must kill. It's a chiyuv. You must kill, the Torah says, man, woman, child, baby. Lo sechaye kol neshama. This is the Chumash. Machlokes, Rambam, and Rashi. Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that since there's another mitzvah in the Torah, that whenever you wage war, you must offer shalom, you must offer proposals of peace. The Rambam's chiddush is that doesn't only apply to other nations than the 7 nations. It even applies, the Rambam is mechadesh, to the 7 nations, and it even applies to Amalek. Even Amalek, which is not, Yeshua actually does not talk about Amalek, but even Amalek and the 7 nations of Canaan are entitled to have their lives spared through a Kriyas Shalom process. So the question then becomes, what is the Kriyas Shalom? What is the peace that we can offer them? So the Rambam says, Kriyas Shalom has 3 elements. Kriyas Shalom means that they have to accept, not to become Jewish, we don't force them to become Jewish, they have to accept in front of a Beis Din to keep the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, which they're obligated anyway, but they must formally agree to accept the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, number 1. Number 2, now the language of the Rambam is they must accept mas, which is taxation, and number 3, they must accept avdus, which literally means slavery. So if you read the Rambam literally, very, very literally, that would essentially mean that the only way they could live is, besides accepting the 7 commandments, is they would have to become our slaves. However, many Achronim don't understand Avdus in that way. They understand Avdus as the recognition of Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael. Meaning not that they have to be slaves, but it means they will be kept alive if they accept the Jewish dominion over Eretz Yisrael. So it turns out, based on that definition, that Kriyas Shalom is not so difficult, meaning it's not that hard for a member of the 7 nations to be able to stay alive in Eretz Yisrael. They accept the 7 commandments of Noach. They agree to the taxation burdens of living in that society, and they accept Jewish sovereignty. According to the Rambam, if a Canaanite or even an Amalekite agreed to those terms, they would be allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, they're even given a name. This is what is called a Ger Toshav, right? A Ger Tzedek is a non-Jew who converts to Judaism. So he's a Jew. A ger toshav is a non-Jew who remains a non-Jew, but he's gone through a process that permits him to live in Eretz Yisrael. So it is important to know that although at the end of the day we might wind up killing quite a few Canaanites, as indeed we did, but they did have a way out. There was a process of shalom. They were offered shalom. And only if they reject kriyas shalom do we then engage in war, and we are given permission and even a commandment to eradicate them. So it's very, very important when people accuse the Torah of promoting genocide and the like, that you at least be aware of the Rambam Shita, that there is such a thing as kriyas shalom. Now, all of this is the Rambam Shita. Rashi, admittedly, does have a much tougher stance. It is Rashi's position that the mitzvah of offering peace does not apply to the 7 nations. But the way Rashi understands it is this: until we crossed the Yarden, meaning when we were still on the other side, Yehoshua sent 3 messages to the Canaanite nations of Eretz Yisrael. Message number 1 is, if you want to get out, you can get out. You can leave. If you want to make shalom, based on the same definition as the Rambam, we will accept your shalom. If you want to fight, we're ready for that too. But Rashi's point is, the opportunity for shalom is only before the Jewish people crossed the Yarden and began the military struggle. Once we cross the Yarden, the opportunity for kriyas shalom has now terminated, because we assume that it's no longer sincere, it's being motivated out of fear or whatever it will be. So even Rashi is moda that there was kriyas shalom for the 7 nations, but that was only one of the 3 options before we crossed the Yarden. Once we crossed the Yarden, which is already called the beginning of the milchama, then lo sechaya kol neshama. So even if somebody wanted to accept the mitzvahs, etc., they were not given the option at that particular point. The interesting question, according to Rashi, is, did you still have the avenue of escape? Because the Ramban says, when he counts the mitzvahs, that there's a mitzvah in the Torah: when we wage war against an enemy, we should not surround them on all 4 sides. We should give them an avenue of escape. Now that sounds counterintuitive. And there's a machlokas why. Some say it's compassion. Some say that when people have an avenue of an escape, they're going to fight less hard because they have an escape route. So it's actually going to help you. But the question becomes, does that mean halachically they're entitled to escape? Meaning, if they simply run away and they leave Eretz Yisrael, do we have any mitzvah to hunt them down? Apparently not. Apparently, even according to Rashi and the Rambam, if indeed they leave the country, it's not. See, that's why Amalek might be a little different. By Amalek, there may be a mitzvah to hunt down an Amalekite wherever he is and kill him, although I'm not advocating this halacha l'maisa. With the 7 nations, it is only when they inhabit the land that there's such an obligation. If they leave, good riddance. That's fine. And I believe that's going to be true both like Rashi and the Rambam, that lo sechaya kol neshama is only for the Canaanites who are in Eretz Yisrael, and the machlokas Rashi and the Rambam is, do we offer them shalom once we crossed the Yarden? Rashi says kriyas shalom is only until we cross the Yarden, and that's based on the Gemara that talks about the 3 letters. You can make shalom, you can leave, or you can fight. But once we cross the Yarden, they no longer have the option of shalom, although I am suggesting they may still have the option of flight, although it's not entirely clear, but I think that's going to be the taitzah of the Ramban's understanding of giving them a fourth avenue. Yeah.
valid to ask questions based on one's own moral intuitions?
Yeah, is it valid to ask questions based on moral intuitions? Absolutely it is. The only question is you have to recognize that if you don't have an answer that can reconcile the Torah to your moral intuitions, you have to accept it. You have to be mevatel yourself. You have to understand that God's seichel is beyond us. But initially, we can be troubled, and initially we can try to understand things. In fact, this is one of the controversial issues of Rav Kook. One of the things Rav Kook taught, again, it's a very daring thing to say. Rav Kook, let me again emphasize, was certainly a gadol by any traditional definition. He knew Babli, Yerushalmi, Shulchan Aruch. He knew Kol HaTorah Kula. He was not someone who was not deeply immersed in Limud HaTorah. But Rav Kook said that sometimes there is a downside in the technical immersion in halachic detail. And he said it may result in an atrophy of conscience and natural morality. A very good example would be the following. It comes up all the time, shadows all the time. People ask the question, can I cheat? Can I file for some tax benefit I'm not entitled to? Can I evade taxes? Can I cheat? Etc. So the way a Ben Torah often approaches it is in a very technical way. They'll go through the sugya of Gezel Akum and Tais Akum and Geneva Stas and find a loophole based on that and based on that and based on that and based on that. Right? You'll go through all the Rishonim, etc. Rav Kook said there's something a little wrong with that picture. Because although it's true that in Limud HaTorah we go through all of the different possibilities, but a person should feel a natural revulsion, a natural hatred against that type of behavior. What? I'm supposed to cheat? I'm supposed to lie? Is that what a Jewish person does? It's a very daring statement that some could interpret as anti-yeshivish. Again, but Rav Kook said that one of the downsides of very deep, complicated Talmudic analysis is it blunts the healthy moral intuition that a person has, which comes from their neshama, that is B'Tselem Elokim. And he warns us that we have to be careful not to allow the technicalities of halacha to take away the natural conscience that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Now, in truth, you see such an idea in Chazal as well, where sometimes in matters of halacha, Chazal actually instructed, go and look at what the Hamonam is doing. Puk chazi ma'amadaber. Meaning, sometimes the common person, the Amoritz, who's less clouded by all sorts of complications, may have a healthier sense of what is good and what is moral. Now, you do have to be careful with that, actually, because the Sama, one of the great commentaries on Choshen Mishpat, actually says the opposite. He says, Das Torah is sometimes exactly the opposite of what a balabas would think. You have to be careful. But there's also a truth that there's a healthy intuition. Like, what would your grandmother say, type of thing. Although it reminds me of a Maisa with Meir Simcha and the Rogatchover. They were both the Rabbanim in Dvinsk, where they had a machlekes how to learn something. So the Rogatchover, Kedarka, who's very sharp, Rogatchover said, okay, let's ask the balabas in the street what he thinks. And since the Sma says whatever the balabas thinks is the opposite of the Torah, so if the balabas says like you, I'm right. And if the balabas says like me, you're right. Hepech balabas, right? So anyway, they asked the balabas what he thought about a certain shaila, and the balabas said exactly like the Rogatchover, which meant, according to the Rogatchover's Hanacha, he's wrong, because das balabatim is hepech das Torah. So Reb Meir Simcha says, the balabas says like you. That means I'm right. So the Rogatchover says, listen, Even a balabas can have a bad day once in a while. So once in a while he'll get it. Once in a while he'll get it right. All right. So you have to be careful. I mean, obviously, chas v'shalom, I'm not suggesting that every uneducated person will come up with the Ratzon Hashem. I mean, we need Talmidei Chachamim, we need Gedolim. But Rav Kook's point is a deep point in many ways. Rav Kook's point basically is we still have to preserve a sense of conscience. We can't just analyze life based on technicalities. And this comes across a lot of things. Let me give you another practical example. Lashon Hara. So people say, is there an issur of speaking Lashon Hara against non-Jews? So the truth of the matter is, technically there is not. Because the primary prohibition against Lashon Hara is the pasuk, Lo selech rachil bi'amecha. Do not be a gossiper amongst your nation. So technically I can say what I want about a non-Jew, right? No issur. But would a refined person do that? Would Rav Moshe Feinstein, spend a few hours talking about Lashon Hara about a guy? The answer is what? The answer is that your midos themselves should steer you away from it. You can't just say halachically there's technically no problem. And as Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky used to point out, midos are not divisible. You start using heterim to cheat goyim, to speak lashon about goyim, whatever it is, and using all sorts of reasons why you can get away with different things, it's going to affect you in all sorts of ways. And really, what Rav Yaakov said, I heard this from Rav Yaakov, but the truth is, it's a medrash in Tana Devei Eliyahu. It's a medrash Chazal that Eliyahu Navi said, "He who cheats the Gentile will cheat the Jew. He who steals from the Gentile will steal from the Jew. He who kills the Gentile will kill the Jew." Meaning, it's going to happen automatically. It's like a cancer. It's like a rat. And you already see this. You see this in the world we live in, where, okay, I can do things to goyim. Okay, well, you're dati liumi. You're also a goy. You wear a kippah sarugah, goy, right? The definition of goy kind of expands. There's a beautiful thing. I can't remember all of it. This is a great thing. I only saw it once online, and I've never been able to find it again. Maybe if you can find it, I'd be grateful. It's about a frum guy, who's he's very in despair. He's very depressed. So he's about to jump off a bridge. He's about to jump off. So another frum person sees him and says, "Wait!" He says, "Are you a Yid?" He says, "I'm a Yid. Baruch Hashem, I'm a Yid." He says, "Are you religious?" "I'm religious." And they keep on going. Went to yeshiva, etc. It was like 20 steps. The last step was something that was so subtle, kind of. They both went to brisk. One went to this brisk, and one went to the other brisk. So the person, go ahead and jump. It makes no difference. Meaning, you're whatever it is. Like there were like 19 steps in which they were exactly the same. One little thing, forget it. You're not worth it at that point. So that's the way it is. So Rav Kook's point, again, on one hand, may be controversial, and it may even sound a little anti-yeshiva, although it's not really. But he's making the point that our natural morality needs to be kept intact. So if you have a question, it's important to ask the question, see if there's a way you can try to understand it. And then, at some point, though, we have to be mevatel ourselves. We have to understand that the Ratzon Hashem, right, this is the paradox of learning. We try to understand as much as we can understand, but then we know that we don't understand everything. Now, I think I did give you an example before from Roald Dahl's short story about baby Hitler. You may remember the story where it was a thought experiment where a beautiful little baby, is sick and coughing and whooping cough and is on the verge of death. And the doctor gets called in, and the mother says, "I love this child so much. And can you please save my child's life?" And the doctor's heart is, opened up with the grief of this mother and the love of this mother. And then he says, well, what if you knew, you were the doctor, what if you knew at that moment that this will grow up to be Hitler who will kill, and you knew who will kill 6 million Jews and even millions of other people. What is the rachamim? What is the mercy at that point? Is the mercy save the little baby? Or is the mercy kill the baby so that millions will live? What we think is mercy in the short term, what we think is compassion in the short term, can actually turn out to be the greatest cruelty. Now, obviously, we're not allowed to act that way. We can't say, I'm not going to treat this kid because he'll grow up to be a terrorist, whatever it is. We can't do that because we don't know. We don't know. But the one entity who does know is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one way of understanding the genocide rules is essentially these are going to be the baby Hitlers who are going to grow up. Now, how do I know? The answer is I don't know. Hashem is telling me that that's going to be the Messiah. Now, again, let me give you an example from Nach itself, the book of Shmuel. Shaul HaMelech was given the commandment to kill Amalek, to eradicate Amalek. And he did 99% of the commandment. He spared one guy. He spared the king. Now, why does he only have, it says out of compassion. That's also schwer. He only has compassion for the king? Well, maybe kings like kings, who knows. But he had compassion on the king. And Shmuel comes back, and Shmuel finishes off the job. Shmuel finishes the job and kills Agag. But in the brief amount of time between the time that Shaul could have killed him and Shmuel killed him, Agag had a sexual encounter with a woman who became pregnant. That woman was the ancestor of Haman, who almost wiped out the entire Jewish people. So Shaul's compassion for one Amalekite almost resulted in the total annihilation of Am Yisrael. So, what was the merciful thing to do under those circumstances? Basically, you don't second guess God. If Hashem is telling you that it's better off that these people shouldn't be in the world, then you don't second guess and say, well, I think it's better for them to be in the world. You don't know what the consequences are going to be. Now, I understand, I understand the circularity here. So essentially the person, why are you better than Hamas? Hamas believes in genocide, you believe in genocide. So your answer is going to be, well, that's because Hashem told us. I get it, because, they're going to say the same thing. Our answer is, yeah, but Hashem really didn't tell you, and Hashem really told us. Now, that happens to be the truth. That is the true answer. But the problem is, it's not such a provable answer, because whatever our defense is going to be, they're just going to, reiterate the same defense, although it's not true on their perspective. Right? So I get the problem of dialogue, but in terms of our own understanding, this is one of the ways that you understand it. Yeah.
But doesn't the Torah already tell us the reason why they had to all be destroyed? Because they were all engaging in child sacrifice to Moloch, and that Hashem had given them enough time to do the Shuvah, and they had not done so. So when you get to the time of even Abraham, right? Hashem says now is not the time to take the land, because we still want to give them some more time. So by the time you get to Yeshua, you had so many centuries where they had so much time to repent, but they didn't do that.
Right. No, yeah, that's 100% correct. I was just adding that. How does that explain the babies and the children? So I was just saying that you have to add the idea that these are going to become just as their ancestors, just as their parents were, and the like. But be it as it may, I think that once you bring in the Rambam with Kriyas Shalom, that's a huge exception to the chiyuv of wiping out the nations because of Kriyas Shalom. And even like Rashi, there was an opportunity for Kriyas Shalom before we crossed the Yarden. So we now come to Yeriho, and Yeriho therefore falls under the general rule of Lo Sechaye Kol Neshama, except for Rachav Hazayna. Remember Zayna Machlokes? Most learn, the Gemara in Megillah learns, Zayna literally means a prostitute. She was a prostitute. Targum Yonis and Ben Uziel says zona means mocheres mezona. She sold food. She was an innkeeper and the like. So he lowers it a little bit. It wasn't as bad as the word normally sounds. And she gave shelter to the spies, and she had a red rope, a red string hanging outside of her window, and that was a simon not to go in. Now, again, we went over this a little bit, but I just want to review the idea of how does Rachav get to live? How does Rachav and her family get to live if there's a chiyuv to wipe out all of the Canaanites? So, according to the Rambam, it's actually no question at all. Rachav accepted the terms of shalom. Any individual can accept the terms of shalom. Rachav agreed to the Zion mitzvah. In fact, Rachav even converted to Judaism. According to Chazal, Rachav married Yehoshua. So she did more than she had to do. But even if it just would have been the 7 mitzvahs, that would have been enough. So like the Rambam, the ability of Rachav and her family to escape Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama is not a kasha at all. It simply complies with Kriyas Shalom. According to Rashi, however, once they cross the Yarden, there's no Kriyas Shalom. So how does it work? So one answer might be that she accepted the peace terms when she was talking to the spies. In other words, the spies crossed the Yarden, but the nation still didn't. So as a result, at that stage in time, she was still able to negotiate. That would be one teretz according to Rashi. And there's a third answer, that Rachav was actually not a Canaanite. She was not one of the Canaanite nations. She was from a whole other nation who happened to be living in Yeriho. And Bichlal, there is no Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama on people who were not of the 7 nations. So we have 3 different understandings of how Rachav manages to live. According to the Rambam, it's straightforward Kriyas Shalom. According to Rashi, you can learn that she accepted the Shalom before Klal Yisrael crossed the Yarden, and even Rashi admits to that. Although, Lamais, I think there's a little bit of a problem. How does that protect the rest of her family? I mean, she spoke to the Meraglim, but, her family didn't. And, if they accepted it was afterwards, I mean, could she be a shaliach? I mean, it's an interesting question. Could she be a shaliach for her family? It's hard to know. And the third answer is the simplest of all, that Rachav and her family were bichlal not Canaanim, and if they were not Canaanim at all, so there's no problem. In fact, they didn't even need a special covenant. The purpose of the Chut HaShani was simply so they'll know not to, in other words, they just need to know. It's not that there was some special thing she had to do to get protected, but they needed to know where she was, so that would be a safe house that they would not attack. Okay, so that's the story with Rachav, but the rest of Yeriho was wiped out, and then there's a further halacha that the Navi says that the city can never be rebuilt again. And now that is clearly modeled after Ir Nidachas, where the Torah says it becomes a mound, a tel, lo siboneh ot. And Yoshua pronounced a curse. Anyone who attempts to build Yericho will make its foundation with the death of his oldest son and will finish the city with the death of his youngest son. In other words, it's basically a curse that a person's children will die in the course of that building. He'll lose his Bechor as soon as he starts, and he'll lose his youngest when he finishes. Later in Nach, in the book of Malachim, we will actually learn that hundreds of years later, there was a fellow who either forgot about this or didn't pay attention to this. His name was Chiel. And Chiel wanted to build Yericho, like a resort, a hotel, whatever it would be. And the Taka says exactly the words of Yoshua. He lay its foundations with his oldest, and he put in the final gates with the death of his youngest. One could ask the Kasha, what type of idiot father would do such a thing? Now, even if you're going to say, okay, I get it that he might not have believed in the original prophecy. In other words, he said, yeah, sure, Baba Maisa, like a Jew who's not religious. But once his kids start dying, right, you'd figure you'd start in the middle, or stop in the middle. Why does he keep going if this is what's happening? The answer is, once again, you see the koach of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, I want to do something. I want to have this hotel. I want to have this casino. Whatever his agenda was in wanting to build Yeriho. And I'm getting all sorts of signs from heaven that it's not a good thing to do. But I say, whatever, coincidence, this happened, that happened, COVID, whatever it would be. Meaning, a person doesn't want to see what he doesn't want to see. And even if that results in the biggest tragedies, a person is simply blind when they have certain agendas. So it does record that curse. Now, it's interesting that the Gemara's drasha is the following. And we have to talk about modern Yericho. It's a problem. There are two different Isurim. You're not allowed to build on the site of ancient Yericho, even if you give the city a different name, even if you called it some other name. And then there's another Isser. You're not allowed to build a city even not on the site of Yericho and call it Yericho. So that's going to be the problem with modern Jericho. If the Isser would only be to build it on the actual site, so in point of fact, it's not on the actual site. It's not on the actual site. The actual site is nearby, but it's not on the actual site. That would be what you might say is the heter. But given the fact that the Gemara says that even if you build it not on the actual site, you're not allowed to build a city and call it Yericho. So what's going to be your heter at this point? Even if it's not on the actual site, it's called Yericho. So the question is, well, who built it? And maybe the Arabs built it, meaning you'd have to then go over the history. I'll try to look into it a little bit more, of the place that's called Yericho. Again, it's Naniach. I think we can safely say it is not exactly on the same site. That much is okay. But still, a Jewish people would not have been allowed to build a city and call it Yericho. Now, I want to point out, I don't know if anyone here is from Jericho, New York. There is a town in New York, Jericho, but I think you're okay there because the Surim of Yehoshua only apply to Eretz Yisrael. They don't apply to Jericho, New York. Yeah.
Once the city of Jericho is rebuilt, are Jews allowed to go there again?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. L'chaira, as far as I can see, there is no Isser to even live in Yericho. The Isser is to build it. The Isser is to build it. The Isser is not to live in it. Now, then the question becomes, what's called building? Let's assume a person lives in Yericho. Is he allowed to do shiputzim? Can he do renovations on his house? Like, you're stuck with whatever your house is. You can be there, but you can't build anything. What about repairing plumbing? You get into a difficult shaila. What is considered to be building? So I'll try to look into it a little bit because I don't think, there are no Jews who presently live in Yericho. Yericho is a totally Arab city. There are yeshuvim nearby. But I think historically, there were Jewish communities in the city of Yericho as we know it. There's old shuls there and the like. So I'll look into it. Halacha, like how is that shaykh? Yeah.
How does a person know? Because a lot of times you ask, and the answer is, don't follow your emotions, follow what's logical. How does a person know when the emotional thing is the right, what your heart tells you is right,
yeah,
and what the seichel tells you is right?
Yeah, that is a really very, very, very good question. Obviously, emotions can lead me very, very much astray. The Yetzer Hara, my taivas, will make me think that something is right when it's really not right. And that's why we have seichel and we have reason. That's why we have halacha, because halacha tells us what we have to do. So it is difficult to know. But nevertheless, Rav Kook's point was that you also have to have a good emotional core of what is moral and what is not moral. And a person has to be careful that the seichel does not destroy that emotional feeling of what is right.
It's almost like what Rambam says, no?
Which Rambam are you talking
It
about?
says like you can follow halacha to the Torah and you can be like it.
Like the Ramban, yeah. The Ramban talks about the idea, famous idea, Naval Birshus HaTorah, a disgusting person with the permission of the Torah. Naval Birshus HaTorah. The Ramban says that that's the mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu, right? All the Rishonim have a problem. The Torah gives us a mitzvah, be a holy person. What is that adding? Be a holy person. So the Ramban says that even if you're keeping all these 612 mitzvahs, but the 613th mitzvah is go beyond the letter of the law, do not be a disgusting person within the technicalities of the halacha. Naval Birshus HaTorah. Okay, alrighty, so we'll stop here and take it.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.